Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining the first TAM customer webinar of 2020. In just a minute, Adam Osterholt will provide an update on VMware's public cloud strategy and dive into some tooling that will streamline this journey. But before we get into today's content, just a couple of points I want to run over with you. Our next TAM customer webinar, as you see on your screen there, will be on February 13th. And in this upcoming session, we'll have a deep dive into VROP's self-driving operations and advanced troubleshooting, and that'll be with Senior Technical Market Architect John Diaz, who always does a great job. If you have any questions during today's webinar, please use the Q&A feature of Zoom, and we'll address them during the webinar. And lastly, this webinar will be recorded, and your TAM can make it available to you after today's session. With that said, I'll turn it over to Adam.
All right, thank you. Yeah, so let's go ahead and jump right in. So, there we go. So yeah, I'm Adam Osterholt. I'm a principal cloud architect for VMware. I've been working on our VMware cloud solutions now for about 4 years, and they've matured a lot, and there's a lot more to come. And in this session, hopefully we'll give you an overview of where we are today, as well as where we're going in the future. And certainly, you know, throughout this, if you have questions, feel free to ask, and we'll get them answered. But this is really meant to be a more practical approach. It's not going to be a lot of marketing. It's going to be more, you know, a focus on how to actually achieve a move to the cloud with VMware Cloud Solutions. So with that, let's get started. So we're going to go through roughly on the agenda. We're going to look at the VMware Cloud overview, our strategy when it comes to the public cloud space, the on-premises space, across the board, really how we're trying to create that hybrid cloud and make that a reality for our customers. And then we'll go through the 3 phases of migrating to a cloud solution. That'll be plan, build, and migrate. And then finally, we'll think about some of the operational considerations to take into account as you move workloads to the cloud. So if we look at how VMware has evolved, right, we started off with vSphere and vCenter, and what we were trying to do there is really abstract away differences in hardware. And so that way you could run, you know, any type of hardware underneath, and you could abstract away and run your workloads on top of that, and move them freely between those different hardware platforms. Then we moved to the SDDC, where we brought in our vRealize suite along with vSphere, vSAN, and NSX to create the software-defined data center. And I think we're all familiar with that at this point. Where I see the next generation going is really with VMware Cloud. And what we view this as is really the ability to operate the same way with the same tooling anywhere within your on-premises, or publicly in the public cloud with our partners or VCPP partners, as well as on the edge with VMware Cloud. And this is going to be a big focus for this session, and we'll focus on VMware Cloud on AWS, but we've expanded those partnerships where now we have a solution running VMware Cloud Foundation on Azure, on GCP, on Oracle Cloud, IBM Cloud, Alibaba, all of the major hyperscaler clouds. You now can run an SDDC instance on top of this. And so that's very important. We'll look at VMware Cloud on AWS as one example of this, but the partners also have built solutions that are very similar on all of the major public clouds. So if we look at how it fits, what we see is the private cloud, all right? Everybody's familiar with that today, running VMware Cloud Foundation. That's a very, you know, simplifying the deployment on top of hardware in your on-premises environment, bringing that same technology to the public cloud, and then delivering the same bits, the same VMware Cloud bits, now on VMware Cloud on Dell EMC, as well as VMware Cloud on AWS Outposts. And the difference there is that those are solutions that you can purchase as a service to run on-premises. So they come as a full rack. You deploy it. You just order it. We deploy it, and it makes compute capacity available in the same way we would in the public cloud on-premises. So you really have a number of choices, and we as VMware, again, we're trying to abstract this away to really simplify and make that decision-making process less about being stuck running in one place to run one specific set of tools, to instead run the workload in the place that is best for that workload. There's many workloads that make sense in the public cloud. There's many that make sense on the edge, and there's many that make sense in your data center today, and really giving you that choice to run those workloads where you want, how you want. That's our goal here. So we're going to dive a little bit more into VMware Cloud on AWS. And again, I promise this is just to get everybody level set on where we're at, and then we'll jump into the operational side. So VMware Cloud on AWS, working on this, I remember the first day that I heard that we were doing a partnership with VMware with AWS. This was long before it was announced, and it was very interesting. And I think the two pieces that are the most interesting, as I've talked to customers over the last 4 years, what I found is the two biggest components of this that are interesting are consistency of tooling, that you don't have to create another silo of tools, another silo of skill sets in order to move to the public cloud. And also the ability to then modernize workloads as well, using native AWS services, or in the case of Azure, using native Azure services, GCP, using GCP services to augment your applications. Today, what I see a lot of customers struggling with is to move to the public cloud. They think it's an all or nothing decision. Either I'm going to modernize that application, refactor it, replatform it completely, and move it to the cloud, or I'm going to keep it on premises and really not gain the benefits of some of these platform services that the public clouds are offering. With this solution, what we can do is you bring your workload as is to VMware Cloud on AWS, and then you can augment it. An example of a customer I've worked with is they had they're in the retail space. They had a application for their supply chain that actually worked pretty well. But the piece that didn't work well was the mobile front end, and they wanted to modernize just that mobile piece of that application. And so with this solution, it allowed them to bring that solution to the cloud as is, without refactoring or replatforming, very simply, and then to augment that application with the native mobile platform services that AWS offers. So it really gives customers more choice on how they want to run the workloads and where they want to actually spend their dollars on investment in those applications. So if we look at it at its most basic level, VMware Cloud on AWS is the cloud foundation stack. So it is NSX, vSAN, and vSphere, along with a dedicated vCenter server deployed on AWS bare metal infrastructure. And so we have several instance types today, and we're not going to get into a lot of detail there, but there are different instance types for different types of workloads. And you just come to our portal and say, I want, an 8-host SDDC to run these workloads, and you click go, and it spins it up in about less than 90 minutes. You have that SDDC available. We're able to then connect back to on-premises through hybrid linked mode, which allows you to keep that single management pane of glass for management of your private cloud environment, as well as your VMware Cloud on AWS environment. So that gives you that operational consistency between on-premises and the public cloud. And then we also have a very unique link that we jointly developed with AWS that allows us to directly access native AWS services from virtual machines running on VMware Cloud. And so this is done through an elastic network interface. And so the same way that an AWS EC2 instance, which is their IaaS instances, the same way it would talk to these platform services is the exact same way that a VMware Cloud and AWS VM talks to those services. So there's no penalty for running in VMware Cloud on AWS versus a native EC2 instance. Again, the goal of both AWS and VMware is to give you choice and allow you to run those workloads where it makes the most sense for them. Then on top of that, this is the standard vCenter server, and that was very important as a design criteria from the beginning, that this vCenter server be the same as on-premises, that it have the same API surface, that it have the same compatibility. And so because of that, our ecosystem of partners, as well as our own products, work seamlessly with VMware Cloud on AWS just like it does with your on-premises environment. So that's kind of the end-to-end how VMware Cloud on AWS operates. The other thing that we've done is, I think everybody that has some experience with the public cloud knows the best practice in public cloud is to deploy workload availability zones. And so we have actually implemented the only stretched cluster available in the public cloud that gives you infrastructure level availability zone failure resiliency. And so the way we do this is we use the vSAN stretch cluster capability, and we stretch the networks with NSX, we stretch the data store with vSAN, and we implement a stretch cluster across 2 availability zones. And why this is important is for your most mission critical applications where you have a 0 RPO objective for them. This solution allows you to create that stretch cluster so that if an availability zone fails, it's treated as a HA event. And what that means is that that workload, HA will kick in and will automatically start that workload in another availability zone. So you don't have to build your applications to understand the availability zone, the availability of availability zones. That's kind of hard to say. Instead, you can depend on the infrastructure to handle that for you and still maintain those low RPO objectives for your applications. It's also a service. And so what that means is VMware handles all of the support here. So we use chat support as well as phone support and web support for this solution. So you can just get on, chat, and you're not chatting with a bot, you're chatting with a real person on the other end, a member of our GSS team. And they'll diagnose the solution, the issue with you in real time. But I think more importantly is VMware also handles the life cycle of the infrastructure. And so we automatically upgrade the environment, we handle patches, we automatically do break fix. We use a lot of predictive failure analysis to determine if a piece of hardware is going to have issues, because we know the one constant is hardware will always have issues out there. And so we automatically replace those. We can add additional capacity in as little as 10 minutes for a environment. So if you need to scale up for a busy season, say in retail around the holidays, or an insurance company around open enrollment time, you need to scale up for a short period of time. You can do that on an on-demand basis, scale up and then scale back down. So it gives you that cloud flexibility for your existing workloads without the need to re-architect. So the use cases that we're primarily seeing, and we're going to focus on application and data center migration here, but we see 4 kind of key use case areas for customers. One is data center extension. That is, you need burst capacity for a busy time. You want to run test dev in the cloud and then pull it back to on-premises for prod. There's a number of different ways that data center extension is utilized by our customers today. We also offer disaster recovery as a service. And so that's based on VMware Site Recovery Manager. And it is done as a service. So you just check a box, say, I want to start site recovery, and then you deploy an appliance on premises and begin replicating your workloads. As I mentioned, we'll focus a lot of this presentation on cloud migrations, and then we have next generation applications, which this is really a couple of things, right? It's that ability to leverage AWS or other clouds' native platform services to modernize, but then also to bring our own solutions to this. And so today we can support Tanzu on this platform, and we're actually working on a service in the future we're planning for to allow us to run the full project Pacific on this platform as well. So those are things that we're all planning in the future. One of the differences you'll notice as well with the service is that we're very transparent about our roadmap. And so if you go to our website, you can see the full roadmap for VMware Cloud on AWS at any time, and it's updated in real time by our product management team, so that as changes happen, you see them immediately on our website. So it's a very different approach with this solution versus a lot of VMware's products. And then, regionally, we're available basically everywhere our customers want to be now. We're available across the U.S. In all of the major regions for AWS in the Americas, so that includes Canada and Brazil. In EMEA, we're available in Dublin, London, Paris, and Frankfurt, and we are working on bringing Stockholm live as well. And then in APJ, we're available in Japan, Korea, Singapore, India, and Australia. So we have a good amount of diversity across the world, and we're committed to be in all AWS regions worldwide. So as they bring online new regions, we will bring the service into those regions as well. Okay, so that's the overview of VMware Cloud on AWS, just to level set everyone. But why are we seeing data center evacuation as being one of the top use cases for VMC? When we first started out, we thought that that data center evacuation would be a use case that comes later, and what we found is that it's actually one of the first use cases our customers are looking at because they have leases expiring on data centers, they have colo arrangements that maybe are not optimal. And so they are looking to expand, to move out of those facilities, and they need to move fairly quickly to get their workloads out so that they can end those relationships. We also just see customers moving specific applications to the cloud to take advantage of the scalability of the cloud. And so we see a very diverse group of applications. Sorry, I should have hit the next slide. I don't know what I was thinking there. But yeah, so that's what we see. And then we obviously see our share of the cloud-first strategy. And this could be something as simple as the CIO has said, we're going to move everything cloud-first, to a full analysis of the applications and the desire to get them out to the cloud. So one of the things that we've done to help customers with this process, because what we found is customers were getting into analysis paralysis when it came to moving workloads to the cloud. And so we're trying to streamline that by bringing together a number of tools that we'll talk about in this presentation. And that would be our VMC Sizer, which helps you to size and build your initial environment or determine what is required to run your workloads. To a Network Insight to do dependency analysis of workloads so that you can figure out, hey, this application really needs to talk to this other application at low latency. Those two need to either move together or stay on premises together. They really shouldn't be separated across, a large amount of real estate. And then HCX, which is really I think, the most underutilized product in the VMware portfolio, is that it really is the magic that allows us to move these workloads so efficiently to the cloud. So if we look at what we're seeing from pain points from our customers and what we're trying to address, we have customers that need to refactor, re-architect, and we'll talk a little bit about why that is, such a pain point for our customers. And then there's always the worries about disruption of business critical applications while the migration is in progress. There's a lot of times that I talk to our larger customers and they don't know necessarily who the app owners even are for a large amount of their applications. And so, they're really kind of stumped when it comes to how to move them because they don't even know who the contact is to talk to about that process. The validation that application is actually meeting those business requirements, right? It lengthens the process when you have to go through a major re-architecture of the application and then go through the full testing cycles and everything else and the inevitable problems that'll creep up. That just adds time to the migration. And then you have the new skills, right? You have new skills to learn, new tools to implement, you have new governance and security models to implement. All of these things take time and really drag the amount of cost as well as the amount of time that migrations take for our customers out. So if we look at this again, VMware's cloud migration solution is built in 3 phases. It's plan, build, and then migrate. And it's available today in its current form. There's going to be a lot of enhancement coming to this, but today it's available at vmc.vmware.com/solutions. So if we look at the plan phase, it's pretty basic. We get to know VMware Cloud on AWS. That's kind of what we just did in the early part of this presentation. Create your VMware Cloud on AWS account. You want to analyze your on-premises workloads. And this could be any number of ways to do that. You basically want to get what's my CPU, memory, and storage demand on these workloads. You want to get some form of output of that. It could be live optics. It could be visualized ops. It could be third-party tools, right? Even something as simple as RV tools, if you don't have a tool in place, could serve that purpose. But you need to get some baseline of what the demand is for these workloads. Then you want to analyze your network dependencies. We have that as optional here because there's some small environments where it's just really not needed. But for any environment of size, I would highly recommend analyzing these dependencies so you can determine the order in which to move workloads. Then you're going to size your environment. You're going to prepare your AWS region, resource. You're going to get your network in order. So we're going to need a couple of network ranges in order to deploy. Figure out how you're going to do DNS and prepare your network connection. That could be either a VPN or a direct connect. It doesn't really matter. It's just a matter of what your workloads actually require. The next phase is the build phase. And so in there, and this is, by the way, this is screenshots from the tool that we're building. So that's why they look kind of weird on the slides, but this is actually just screenshots from our website. So from the build phase, right, you're going to go in, you're going to create your SDDC, you're going to configure your networking, configure your AWS connectivity, download the hybrid linked mode gateway, and you're going to enable vRealize Log Insight Cloud, which is the audit logging platform for VMware Cloud on AWS. And then finally, we're going to plan the migration, we're going to install HCX, and we're going to migrate by waves. And we'll go into a lot of detail about what that actually means. Okay, so I think I've talked about the majority of these items. I'm going to go past that and get right into how we actually do this migration. And so we have a couple of different types of migrations that we're seeing from customers. Again, these app-specific migrations, these could be Oracle, SQL, Tier 1 applications. It could be moving some apps, as I mentioned with that retail customer, closer to AWS services to take advantage of them. You could have a wave of data-intensive applications, or you start with Tier 2 or Tier 3 applications in your environment. The other place that we're seeing customers is around infrastructure refreshes, that they don't want to spend additional capital on refreshing their infrastructure. Instead, they would rather begin the move to the cloud, so they can move that to an OpEx versus CapEx expenditure. And then we have the data center wide migrations, which we've talked about, which are a lot of things, but one that we haven't is M&A activities. So I've talked to a few customers, and they acquire smaller companies, and they never quite know what that company has done, right, with their workloads, how secure they are, in what kind of shape they are, what kind of security stance they have. And so a lot of times they find out they're just in a broom closet, right, inside their facility. And so around that, moving these workloads out to VMware Cloud on AWS can be a nice interim step to at least stabilize that infrastructure and then determine what you want to do with those workloads from there. So that's something we've actually seen customers use pretty extensively with VMware Cloud. So the other piece that we see, and the interesting thing here is this slide was actually created by an AWS principal. And so when we look at the costs, right, when you think about the costs associated with AWS or any native cloud, and then VMware Cloud, when you look at it, the blue is VMware Cloud, the orange is, for lack of a better example, to say AWS here. The costs at the beginning and the end are largely similar, right? But what you end up with is when you need to re-platform at a minimum and re-architect potentially, you end up taking a lot of costs on during that migration. And so what VMware Cloud on AWS does allows you to flatten that migration cost bubble, so you're not taking a big hit on costs, and bring those workloads to a cheaper platform to operate them, but without taking that hit of large expenditure to get them there. So I think this is very interesting, and it really shows something that I've seen with our customers very well from a graphical perspective. So I really like this slide that AWS put together. Okay, so we're going to go into the planning phase now. So the first thing that you want to do, and this is where I see a lot of customers fall down, right from the start, is that they'll treat this as just an infrastructure move and only involve the infrastructure team in this cloud migration. So really what we need is we do need the infrastructure administrators and architects from both compute, storage, network, data protection, right? All aspects of infrastructure need to be involved. And that's the number one piece of your migration team. But you also need networking and security, and specifically security. I see over and over that security is brought in at the end of the process, not at the beginning. And it leads to a lot of delays and just a lot of problems. And so what I recommend is bring security in from the start, develop that working relationship, and you'll find that things go a lot smoother with security in the room and a part of all the decisions that are made regarding moving to the cloud. As I mentioned earlier, the app owners, sometimes this is easier said than done, but you definitely want your app owners to be involved. They need to understand what's going on with their applications. They need to understand how you're planning to move them. And they'll also be indispensable when it comes to time to actually schedule the moves to make sure they're aware and that there's no surprises when the application does move. And then all of the operations side stuff. You don't forget about the automation tools that you use. Don't forget about the life cycle, the change management systems, all of these systems that are integrated with your infrastructure to do operations. Those all will likely need minor tweaks, right, in order to see these workloads in their new location and manage them in their new location. So, the first thing is around sizing. And as I mentioned, the key pieces of information, and this is publicly available today, it's vmcsizer.vmware.com. And if you go to VMC Sizer, it's going to ask you for just a few details around input. The IO profile of your workloads, the VM profile, what's your average vCPU, your average memory for these workloads, as well as some of the server details. And this will be, what instance type do you think is right for these workloads? You'll put that in, and what it will do is it'll generate a configuration that will say, okay, to run these workloads, you need 20 instances in this region, and you need 4 clusters, and it'll do that configuration for you. And this tool is rapidly evolving as we evolve the service. And so it changes on a frequent basis. But the beauty of it is it's just available publicly, and anybody can go use this tool. So I can't recommend this enough. This is when our team sizes for a customer, this is the tool we use. This is the standard across VMware. And this has been road tested and is very, very good about producing correct output for you. Then the next piece is, okay, I want to start looking at relationships between the applications in my environment. And so you can do something as simple as download Network Insight. You can use the SaaS service for 30 days for free. You can download that. You can then run that in your environment, and it'll give you that layout of, okay, this VLAN, this application is talking to this application. And so it's great for that. So you can see how much traffic is flowing between applications, and that allows you to have the baseline knowledge to move to the stage of building waves for the migration of your workloads. But a side benefit that this also does is that it gives you the ability to also see what your data egress is going to look like. So the only variable charge that we have with VMware Cloud and AWS is networking. And so you pay for networking that goes out of the cloud. You don't pay for inbound networking. And so you can use this tool to also get a good estimate on what those data egress fees are going to look like, so that you can see, get a really good budgetary estimate for what the total cost of the solution is. And I know variable charges scare everyone, because if you do things wrong, right, you can end up with a very big bill that you're not prepared for. And so this helps you to prevent that. And so again, so there's no surprises along the way. But Network Insight, beyond that, is also very useful in VMware Cloud on AWS. It's fully supported on VMware Cloud on AWS and allows you to also do things like creation of your firewall rules, to go through and see what rules are needed for the distributed firewall and create that to increase your security posture. So we see a lot of customers moving from a standard vSphere environment with no real microsegmentation. And when they move to VMware Cloud on AWS, they implement zero trust. And so they only allow the services that need to talk east-west inside the data center. And so this is a great time to make those kinds of changes and really implement those to increase the security of your environment. Okay, so the Network Insight has a lot of different options, right? You can either deploy the SaaS service, or you can deploy the platform and collector on premises. You can deploy the platform on premises, the collector in VMware Cloud on AWS. You can put it all in VMware Cloud on AWS and then just run a collector on premises. So basically any architecture that you would want is available, and it's also available as a SaaS service as well. So however you want to use it, again, you can get a 30-day trial. Just talk to your account team and they can get that set up for you. Okay, all right. So running the migration assessment, right? So what you want to do is a couple of things here. You need to think about your workload planning, determining the best cluster. And this is going to go, unfortunately, way too much of IT architecture is guided by licensing out there. And so you're going to want to think about my Oracle workloads. So I want to support, put a dedicated cluster in for those. My SQL workloads, Windows, RHEL, right? All of these different platforms. You want to start planning on how you're going to carve those up into clusters that make the most sense financially as well as logically for you. And then you want to look at, how you want to actually purchase the solution. There's big discounts if you commit to 1 or 3 years, but you can do as little, you can do it on demand as well. So you just pay by the hour. And so you want to take the workloads and you want to figure out what your steady state is going to look like. So say you have 10 hosts that are always going to be fully utilized in this platform. You want to put those in as subscriptions to either 1 or 3 year to achieve the discounting, and then run the fluctuating workloads up and down as on demand. And you can mix and match that within a cluster, within an SDDC, but you really need to plan that out. And that's something that we have, TCO tools. We have tools that can help you to do that. Again, talk to your account team and we can get those to you. So you can make intelligent decisions there to minimize the cost to you. And then you want to go ahead and do your migration planning. And this is where you start breaking things up into waves and you decide how you want to migrate the workloads. And there may be some workloads that make sense after all of this to still move to native AWS or native Azure or whatever. You need to highlight those workloads and put together a plan for migrating those separately. Okay. So the first step I always go through is I start at the most basic level and I look at the kind of 3 classes of workloads and I try to bucketize these into prolonged downtime and things, test dev, things like that can be down for a day and nobody really notices. To minimal downtime, things that could handle a reboot of that server, but really can't handle much more than that. And then those mission critical applications that can have no downtime. They need to move without the application going offline. And just start building those buckets of these different workloads. And this serves as kind of the first step in building your waves of migration. The other things to think about that I've run across with customers very frequently is there's always still some physical hardware. As much as we would love that to not be the case, there's always still something running around on physical hardware. Got to think about, can I make that virtual? Is this the time to go virtual with that if I'm trying to evacuate the data center? Does it make sense to move it over to AWS's bare metal service? Right? You can just run an EC2 instance on bare metal as well, or to colo that equipment. And if it's a risk-based Unix system, you just colo that close to an AWS region in, say, an Equinix data center or some other colo provider as a way to get that out of the data center. Another thing is Active Directory, DNS, DHCP, timesync. All of these things are core infrastructure services that we don't often think about when it comes to this, but there needs to be, a very good plan put together around how you're going to operate those in this environment. I have one customer that they had to have a satellite link for timesync, right, as one example. That's not going to happen in the cloud. Nobody's going to allow you to go up on a roof of a AWS data center and put a satellite dish up there to grab timesync data. So you need to think about timesync from that perspective. Same with DHCP, DNS. Those things all require redundancy, replication. Make sure that you have local copies of these things in the cloud. And then load balancing and edge security. You can either deploy appliances in VMware Cloud on AWS. Obviously, we have Avi Networks now, but any other solution should work fine in VMware Cloud on AWS, like F5, et cetera. Or you can use AWS's Elastic Load Balancer. And so that can actually load balance workloads in VMware Cloud on AWS as well. So if you want to move away from traditional solutions to a cloud-based solution, that is also an option. So these are just things that are outside of what we think about as traditional workloads that I see customers, reaching a point and causing delays because they didn't plan these items out in advance. The other thing you got to think about is industry certifications. So today we have, the standard, the usual ISO, the SOC, and we have SOC 1, 2, and 3, and we have SOC 2 and 3 Type 2. HIPAA, we can sign BAAs for the service. We have GDPR for EMEA, and we also have done a self-assessment and published those results out to the CSA website. So you can go out there and there's about 300 standard questions, and you can get answers to a lot of how we handle various aspects of compliance. There's other compliance that's we're working on. FedRAMP for the government side workloads is actively in progress and making good progress there. We're also working diligently on PCI. We don't have that yet, but we are working on that, and that is planned to be brought into the service in the future. So again, and any other compliance certifications, talk to your account team. There's many, many, many of them, and we may or may not have that compliance, but your account team would be the source of truth for that. Okay. So if we look at disaster recovery too, the other thing I see customers forget is they had DR on premises and then they moved to the cloud and they don't have any plan for disaster recovery. Just because you're in the cloud does not mean that you don't need disaster recovery anymore. And so we are able to use VMware Site Recovery, which is our disaster recovery as a service, to go between availability zones, between AWS regions. So for example, you could deploy workloads into the Virginia region, and you could do disaster recovery to Ohio to minimize that latency. So again, across region, we can do DR any which way you want. We can do fan in, so you can do many SDDCs down to one. Anything you would like, we can do with VMware Site Recovery as our disaster recovery as a service. So tools. So if we think about, again, now we're getting more detailed. We've taken that and we've bucketized our workloads by downtime tolerance. And now we're starting to get a picture of how we're going to migrate those workloads. So we can do cold migration for workloads that can handle prolonged downtime. We can do replication, basically what we call bulk migration for workloads that require minimal downtime. And then we can do live vMotion for workloads that require zero downtime. And that can be done a couple of different ways now. So we have three tools here. As I mentioned, we have cold migration, we have vMotion, we have bulk, and then we have a new tool called replication assisted vMotion. And so cold migration is pretty obvious, right? We're replicating it and it comes over there and then we start it up. Very simple, right? The workload is powered down while the replication goes on. vMotion is what we do, all of us do most every day. Migrate a workload from host to host, live via vMotion. But you can only do one of those with HCX at one at a time. So you basically do them individually. You can't schedule a big bulk of them. A bulk migration replicates the workload while it's alive. So while it's on, it's replicating out to the cloud. And then it triggers a reboot of that workload, and then it starts up in the cloud. So it is minimal downtime, but there still is that reboot and that startup in the cloud. A tool that we have now that's in preview, and again, I want to be very clear that's in preview, is replication assisted vMotion. And so think of this as the best of both worlds from bulk migration and vMotion. So what we do is we replicate the workload just like we do with bulk migration. And then when it's time to actually migrate, so you can schedule a time, and when that time hits, what will happen is it will convert that over to a vMotion. It will do the incremental storage migration. It will replicate the memory, and it will move that workload live over to VMware Cloud on AWS. So we think replication assisted vMotion will, be what the majority of customers use going forward once we make it generally available. Okay, so if we think about, sorry, there's a lot of animation on this. If we think about the levels of workload mobility we have here, right? With enhanced vMotion compatibility, we don't set EVC on VMware Cloud on AWS, so there's no EVC mode set. But with vSphere 6.7 and above, we have per VM EVC. And so you can, in the VM settings, set an EVC mode on a per VM basis. And so that is the preferred solution if you need to move workloads back and forth. Think of it more like a data center extension than a data center migration type of situation. The other thing to think about is really utilizing content library. That's a very underutilized feature in vSphere in general. But you can take content library and publish all of your templates, your ISOs, all of that, and then have those automatically replicate out to VMware Cloud on AWS. And so I would highly recommend that, especially when you're in the middle of migration. So you aren't maintaining two sets of templates, two sets of ISOs, all of that. That just gets very painful. And then we have what we talked about, cold migration, live migration. You can do both of those outside of hybrid cloud extension. But honestly, 99.9% of our customers are using hybrid cloud extension to migrate. It really solves this, and I think of it like an orchestrator for migration activities. Okay, so then you take your waves. So you've built these waves. You've taken your app dependencies into account as you built them as well. So you take what you've learned from Network Insight, that these two applications need to go together. You've made sure they're in the same waves, and you've created all of these waves of migration. And you begin your migration process. So before you do that, you need to build, right? So you build your environment, and that's very straightforward. I'm not going to go into it in great detail here. It should be pretty straight and easy. And then you plan your migration. So this is where we've done the planning. Now we're ready to install and test HCX, and then we're going to migrate by wave. So at the end here, when you execute the migration, you're going to use HCX, and we've talked about what it can do. But I think, at a high level, this tool is available both in VMware Cloud on AWS. It's also available on premises if you want to migrate workloads between on-premises environments. But it allows you to take a workload running on vSphere 5.0 and greater, and to move that workload to any other platform. And so in this case, we'll move that to VMware Cloud on AWS. And it does that through a couple of things. Number one, it's an orchestrator. It gives you a console. You can go in, you schedule these waves, you can schedule them to occur at a certain time. You can be much more hands-off with the actual move. But it also does a couple of features at the networking layer, which are very important. One is it creates this hybrid interconnect, and that allows you to do your layer 2 stretch, so stretch your layer 2 networks without having, you don't need to have NSX on premises to do that. You can do that just as part of the HCX tool and stretch those layer 2 networks out. It also includes WAN optimization. So it compresses data on the wire and also multi-threads the data throughput on the wire so that you can achieve greater speeds across WAN connections with your data when you are migrating. So all of this is built into HCX. HCX is bundled into VMware Cloud on AWS. You don't pay anything extra for it. It's just part of the service. And so you deploy this, you deploy a couple of appliances on premises, and then you configure it. When I do POCs for customers, I can usually have this running in 4 or 5 hours. You know, from the time I start to build the SDDC to when I can migrate the first workload is usually, I start in the morning. Right after lunch, we can migrate workloads. So it really is very easy and straightforward to get this up and running. Okay, so we talked about the migration profiles. You know, we see the 3 main options that we see customers use. Again, the key here is if you use vMotion, you can only do a single workload at a time. Bulk can do bulk. Replication-assisted vMotion can do many at a time. We generally recommend you want migration waves of less than 100 workloads per migration wave. Okay, so what needs to be considered during migration? All right, so there's a couple of things that I see customers consistently miss here as they're migrating workloads. The first is your monitoring tools and your management tools. You know, make sure that those tools are integrated with both environments before you move the workloads. Otherwise, you're going to move them out to VMware Cloud on AWS, and suddenly your ops team is going to lose all visibility, right, to what's going on. And so you want to make sure this is in place before you move the workloads. And then you obviously all the external integrations you do, Power CLI scripts, you know, everything that you're doing in your environment, you want to begin directing those to the new environment as well. At the end of the migration, you know, don't forget to unstretch your networks. And this can all be done in a very automated fashion in HCX. So you can easily unstretch that network and make that, you know, bring that back to one that just exists locally in VMware Cloud on AWS. Very straightforward, very easy. And then reconfigure your load balancers, your other security appliances, right? There's likely going to be, you know, north-south firewalls that are going to need to be tweaked for any changes that you might be making along the way. A lot of times customers don't want to change IP spaces, but sometimes it's just needed to change IP spaces, and don't forget to reconfigure your load balancing and security. And then the number one mistake that I see customers make is they don't keep their backups in the cloud. And so they're still backing up from on-premises workloads in the cloud. And the one variable charge I mentioned earlier is data egress. That will bite you, and it will cost you a lot if you do not get your backup solution running in the cloud. So implement any of the major partners work just fine with VMware Cloud on AWS, and they can back up to AWS S3, which is a much more economical way to do it, and even replicate that across regions for backup and business continuity. So just don't forget that. I've seen a number of customers that just keep their backup tools. They don't do anything with them, and then they start backing up in the new environment, and it generates a ton of WAN traffic across their environment. And again, when you move, start with a new tool, I mean, this will likely be required, but don't forget, make sure your first backup, do a full backup. Don't try to keep doing incrementals when you get to the cloud. Okay, I think that was the majority of the content. I kind of moved through there pretty quick. So I think we can, if there's any questions, we can certainly answer those live or via the Q&A.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. If anyone does have a question, if you want to raise your hand in Zoom, we can unmute you and you can ask it. There's one question that did come in through the Q&A. If you want to file others in that way, feel free, everyone. But the one question that's in there, the location for the Network Insight version that's available for free for this, is it the 30-day trial?
Yeah, it's just a 30-day eval, right? So with our Network Insights available as a service, if you go out to the cloud.vmware.com, you can request a trial. Or, I mean, everybody here is a TAM customer. I mean, we can certainly help you out with getting access to that. It's not, there's no limitation there.
Okay, I added that link to the Q&A section. Let me see, there's somebody who raised their hand. I'm trying to find them real quick.
They raised it and lowered it.
All right.
Any other questions? Again, about anything that we've talked about, right? And it's not just it doesn't just have to be VMC on AWS. Certainly anything's inbound here cloud-wise.
Yep.
There's somebody.
Go ahead, Lenny. I think we should be able to hear you.
Okay, yeah, can you hear me?
Yep, gotcha.
Okay, cool, yeah. So what about vRealize Automation Cloud on-premise? Is there any movement towards bringing that onto the premise? And the reason why I'm asking is because Cloud Assembly is apparently available only via the VRA Cloud solution.
Yep. I think you're not Cloud Assembly. I think you're talking about CodeStream, right?
No, Cloud Assembly is what I'm talking about.
All right. Yeah. So the goal here is that it comes in pieces, right? Because that was a complete rewrite of vRealize Automation. So vRealize Automation 8 is the first version based on the cloud solution, and so that will become more, more and more closely coupled to vRealize Automation Cloud over time. I don't have a specific timeline there, but that certainly is in the plan.
Okay. Thanks.
No problem. All right. Any other questions? Oh, there's one in Q&A. Okay. All right. Somebody needs a recording, so there we go. All right. Any other questions? Yeah. Yeah. Any other questions? I'm happy to stick around here and answer, but at the same time, if there aren't any, either we did really good on content or everybody was so bored they fell asleep, one or the other.
No, I think it was the first. I think this was really useful content, Adam. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, no problem.
And as was just mentioned, this recording or this webinar is recorded, and you can get that from your TAM. And certainly look out for the registration for the February webinar, where we'll be digging into VROPS 8 and some advanced troubleshooting and the troubleshooting workbench that's new to 8. And so that should be a great session as well. So thanks much all, and we'll wrap it up now.
All right. Thank you all.